Puccini essentially he didn't have a dad in his life past age 5, and he didn't have any mentor that was really a male mentor that he really connected with very well. And so women were very much the center of his existence. And one quote that I thought was just fascinating from reading the biography of Philip Smeets was about Puccini's first tentative opera. He'd won a contest at school, and then he'd gotten this opera published, and it was just as it was going to be performed when his mother was dying, and he was in his 20s, and his mother had devoted herself completely to creating a musician out of him, as the oldest male in the family. He was crowned with going to become a musician. So she did everything she could to make that possible. And so when she was dying, she could at least see that he was going to that he was writing a successful opera. So she took her wedding ring off her finger and slipped it on his hand, and he wore it the rest of his life. And in a comment that's related to this event, he said, "I am a composer, but after my mother's death, I became a corpse." So just think about that as we go along and see how that might play out in something that we see in the themes of his plays or in the evolution of his character. So what he tended to do was, Elvira came into his life, and they couldn't marry because her husband wouldn't give her a divorce. She'd left a son, a little bit like Anna Karenina, and her husband, so he would not give her a divorce. So they were together for 20 years before he died. And then as soon as he died, they did marry, but he felt kind of forced to marry her because he was in real hot water because he'd been having an affair with Karina during the writing of Madame Butterfly. And he had also had a brief affair with an English woman named Sybil Seligman. But she was smart enough to say, I don't want to ruin my marriage or leave my children, and so let's just be friends. And actually, it was probably the deepest relationship he ever had in his life. They wrote letters to each other, and they were good friends to the end of his life. So because of the hot water he was in with Karina, he decided he would reward Elvira by marrying her. But meanwhile, Elvira was becoming more and more the bad woman in his life. He was resentful of her. He complained about her. She was sort of the background woman, the mother. And as he would meet these other women, more and more the relationship they had with each other would deteriorate. She wouldn't be the one that would be inspiring an opera, and she wouldn't be the one who actually, she was so upset with Doria just because Doria not only nursed him through a bad car accident, taking care of him, physically, not literally nursed him, but he might have needed it. But she was now taken to ironing, and so Elvira lost the job of being able to iron his clothes. And that was just the last straw for Elvira because she felt like there was nothing much else she could do other than be the bad woman in his life. So the women that he was having affairs with were the good women, the exciting women, the women he didn't know every day, the women he, would sneak away and have an affair, for a few days, or go to Berlin and meet Josephine von Stengel, or there was a Margit, and there was a Rose, and so all of his life there was a woman, and these affairs would last maybe 5 years at a time, or 2 to 10 years. So one of the concepts I want to talk about in terms of looking at Puccini's operas is, in the first place, I think that Puccini's operas came out of his life experience. He was working out his life issues. And so a concept we could look at is the concept of psychic reality. And by that, that's a psychoanalytic term, and it's essentially psychic reality is inner life. You know, it's inner life as opposed to reality out there. And psychic reality develops from one's predispositions and temperament, or one's genetics, or one's maybe particularly, we look at how psychoanalysts look at how the personality evolves within the relationship. You know that it's a baby and the mother, or the caretaker, whatever it is these days, but the child gets a sense of who they are by the experience they have with the person they're spending a lot of time with. So that's another basis of psychic reality. So we all have our little individual experiences through life that create how we sort of a lens or a filter that we look at what's going on out here. So like every person in this room, if something happened, we'd have some similarities about how we would see it, but we'd have some different reactions about how we'd see it too, based on our psychic reality. So I think when Duane was speaking, he talked a little bit about psychic equivalence, and so that has to do with when one gets confused and thinks that one's inner reality, is literally out there, and you're right because you know it. So I think then what happened with Puccini is that he somehow in his development he didn't quite get the good mother and the bad mother together very easily. He tended to view his relationships in terms of, bad Elvira, the wife he could complain about but would never leave and never divorce, even though he kind of promised a couple of the other women he'd marry them, he didn't. And the good women who were the exciting affairs. And so what would happen in a healthier developmental evolution would be that someone would begin to realize that, that the two would come more together, and one would realize that in every person and in every relationship there are strengths and weaknesses, and which creates, the normal situation of some ambivalence. But you can love someone, but you might have some ambivalent feelings about them, or you might see that they have some weaknesses, or that they aren't a perfect emotional match, or whatever, but you can still have intimacy, you can still have a commitment to someone, and you can weather the ebbs and flow of a long-term relationship. Well, that was something that Puccini didn't ever achieve.